A long time ago, in the village of Wabali, one evening, as the villagers celebrated the New Yam festival, Olissa and Uju ran through the forest, holding something strange in their hands. And coming quickly behind them was Uju's father, Madu. Stop there! He screamed at the top of his voice. Uju and Olissa kept running because that was the only way to hide Uju's secrets. Unfortunately, as they ran, Olisa tripped on a branch and fell. Instantly, Uju halted and began to help Olisa get up, but he was deeply hurt. Uju, run. I do not want your father to catch you here, he said to her. But she refused. After all, it was her fault that they were running through the forest instead of celebrating with the villagers. Soon, Uju's father finally caught up with them. You're a stupid child, he said to his daughter as he picked up what Uju and Ulisa tried to hide. It was a bunch of colorful leaves held together by tiny strings. He carefully rolled it out, and behold, it was a lovely dress. I knew it. Have I not told you to stop this nonsense? He shouted at the top of his voice. And then, just as if he suddenly noticed Ulisa's bleeding leg, he jumped in fear. My prince! My prince! He said, panicking. He lifted Prince Olisa on his back and began making his way to the palace. But as he went, he stepped on Uju's dress, scattering the leaves with his feet. Go home, lock yourself in your mother's room, and do not come out until I tell you to, Madu instructed his daughter. Olisa struggled on Madu's back, begging him not to allow Uju to enter that room. But Madu did not care. Uju began to cry too, while picking up the remains of her dress. In the past, she shared her passion for dressmaking with her father, but he was always against it. Our village is known for the greatest warriors and herbalists. I do not have a male child to become a warrior, so you must become a herbalist, he would say harshly to her every time. Severally, Madu would seize the Ankara fabrics Uju used to sew. When she managed to make a dress, he would burn it, and when he finally realized his daughter was not going to stop her crafts, he banned her from buying fabrics and making dresses at home. But that did not bother her because she had Ulisa, her best friend. Madu and the king were best friends, and their children shared the same friendship. Olisa supported Uju's craft with his whole heart. He was always fascinated by how well she could sew anything using a needle. He allowed her to hide her fabrics in his quarters, and every day she would visit him and sew her dresses while he watched in awe. But one day, Uju decided she wanted to try something besides fabrics. So she asked Olisa if they could go around looking for colorful leaves because she wanted to make an elegant leaf dress. Madu wondered why she was always gathering leaves, and whenever he asked her, she would say, Papa, I am just fascinated by the colors. But he knew something was not right. Regardless, he brushed it off. But on the day of the New Yam festival, while he was leaving the king's chambers, he saw his daughter and Olisa carrying what seemed like a dress with some of those leaves he had seen Uju with, and that was when he began pursuing them to confirm his suspicion. As Uju walked towards her house in tears, she knew she was in so much trouble, and when she finally stood in front of her mother's room, her heart began pounding in fear. Was her father so angry that he would punish her by sending her to her mother's room? She thought to herself. After a long wait outside, she bravely pushed the door open, and immediately she fell to the floor, weeping more profusely. It had been 2 months since her mother died, and nobody had gone into her room. Now, she was forced to accept her harsh reality. Uju shut the door behind her, settling down on the floor. She cried until she slept off. Later at night, her father returned and called her name through the window. He brought some food for her to eat. However, he refused to let her come out of the room. You will stay there for 1 month. I am sure you will come to your senses soon, he said. Every day after that, the maid brought food for Uju, but she barely touched it because she was traumatized from being in the room alone. But on the fifth day, in the evening, she got very hungry. Uju stared at the different delicacies the maid had served her for the day, and she quickly stuffed it all into her stomach. Shortly after that, she dozed off. When she woke up, she was excited because it was the first time she had slept properly in almost a week. She realized it was due to the amount of food she had eaten. So, Uju came up with a plan to make her time in the room pass very quickly. Every day, she would request very large portions of food from the maid. Then she would force herself to eat all of it, and minutes later, she would feel sleepy and doze off. That was her routine for the time spent in her mother's room, and as expected, the days flew by very quickly. Uju waited eagerly for the month to pass by so she could see Olisa again. She was curious to continue their conversation. The last time she saw him, he said to her, I have something to tell you, but I will let you know before the end of the day. She blushed as she thought of his words. Maybe he finally wanted to admit his feelings for her, and she could not wait to tell him she felt the same way too. A month passed, and her father unlocked the door and asked her to come out. But when Uju came out, he looked at her surprisingly. You put on a bit of weight in such a short time, he said to her. But Uju did not think so. Yes, her belly was protruding a bit, and she always felt heavy, but it was only because of her eating habits. Now she was out, she would shed all that fat in no time, she thought to herself. She apologized to her father again for disobeying him, but Madu looked at her with sorrow in his eyes and said, My daughter, there is something I have to tell you. But he was interrupted by the maid, who told him that a visitor had arrived to see him. Madu told Uju they would speak later, then went out to greet his visitor. When Uju was sure the coast was clear, she ran out of her house, making her way to the palace to see Olisa. And when she got there, she was greeted by the queen. They exchanged pleasantries, and then the queen smiled and said, You are a well brought up child. Although your friend is gone, you still came to check up on us. Uju was confused. Gone. What did she mean by that? Gone where? She asked the queen. Did your father not tell you? My son went to the warrior camp where he would train to become king. She answered, and immediately Uju began to cry. Olisa always told her that his father did not believe in training at the warrior camp, but that was not why she was crying. She cried because this meant the next time she would see Olisa would be in 5 years. Uju cried all the way home. She was upset at the whole world, but most especially Olisa. Why would he leave without saying goodbye to her? She felt so alone. First, her mother died suddenly, and now her best friend, who she was secretly in love with, left her for 5 whole years. When she got home, she went back to her mother's room and locked herself indoors, refusing to come out. Her father and the maid begged her endlessly, but she did not listen, and as usual, she received her meals through the window daily. When Uju was not eating, she would be sleeping or thinking about the day she would see Olisa again. 3 weeks passed, and Madu was tired of his daughter's sadness, so he decided to do something nice for her. Later that evening, he knocked on the door, begging her to open. Uju, you are going to love the gift I have for you. Oh. Please, come out and see it. He begged her. After he knocked for a while, she finally came out, and to her surprise, she saw her father with a pile of Ankara fabrics. Madu hugged his daughter and told her he would allow her to pursue her dressmaking passion on one condition. Attend Mama Ngozi's training for herbalists in the mornings, and in the evenings, you can sew your dresses. It's only for a year, and you don't have to practice when you are done. I just want you to learn this skill. Uju accepted his offer without hesitation. She was happy her father would let her sew her dresses. That was the best news she had heard in a long time. But Madu was concerned about something else too. My daughter, you have put on some more weight, he said. But Uju told him it was due to her time in her mother's room and the fat would all melt away now she was outside. But she was wrong. What she did not realize was that she had trained her stomach to only get satisfied with huge amounts of food. Uju had developed a food addiction, and even as she stood in front of her mother's room with her father, she was starving. The following week, Uju made her way to Mama Ngozi's compound. As she arrived, she met other students on the learning ground. What is Her Majesty doing here? Someone asked loudly, and suddenly everyone began to laugh. Uju did not have to turn her head to know who was speaking. It was Nonso. For as long as she could remember, Nonso made it her duty to pick on Uju, especially because of her friendship with Olissa. And it wasn't just Nonso. Many other girls in the village did not like Uju because of Olissa. Is her dress too tight or is she getting bigger? Nonso said again. And as usual, everyone laughed loudly. Uju refused to answer. Rather, she sat down quietly, and soon after, Mama Ngozi began to teach. But Uju was very worried. She thought her father exaggerated her weight gain. Was it so noticeable? She asked herself. That day, Uju refused to eat the packed lunch she brought from the house. She had to find the way to drop the weight, and when she got home, she declined the food she was given. But at night, the hunger she felt in her belly would not let her sleep. She turned and tossed on the bed, and finally, she found her way to the kitchen and ate until she finished the pot of food. Uju cried herself to sleep. How was she going to lose the weight with such a big appetite? She thought about Olisa. He would be disappointed to see her that way when he came back. Days passed, and all her attempts to eat less were fruitless. And her mates at Mama Ngozi's Learning Center did not make it easy for her. A year finally passed and the training was complete. Uju was naturally excellent, so she excelled. However, she was just glad to leave Nonso and the others who poked at her because of her weight. Unfortunately, Uju did not succeed in losing weight. Rather, she was way bigger than when she resumed at the learning center. On the evening of her graduation, she waited for her father to come back because she knew he was going to give her a gift for her excellent performance. But she was disappointed with what Madu had to say. My daughter, I have found a wife for myself, Madu told his daughter. Uju looked at him in shock because her mother was barely 16 months in the grave. Papa, please, just wait a bit longer. What if she treats me badly? She asked her father, with tears in her eyes. But it was too late because Madu had already paid the woman's bride price. He was only waiting for the perfect time to tell his daughter, Uju, you will love this woman. And she has a daughter. You will finally have a sibling. She was at Mama Ngozi's learning center too. I'm sure you know her. Her name is Nonso, he said. As soon as Uju heard Nonso's name, it was like shock went through her body. Every time she forgave her father for hurting her, he managed to do something worse than what he was forgiven for. She cried, but her father thought she was exaggerating because the woman was not her biological mother. After his conversation with Uju, things began to move pretty quickly. Nonso and her mother, Ijoma, moved in, and nobody was as happy as Nonso. Her new father was a very wealthy man. She could not wait to enjoy all the benefits from a father who was the right hand to the king. Madu gave Nonso Uju's late mother's room, and this broke Uju's heart the most. Although she initially hated going in there, the room had now become a place of solace for her. 2 years passed, and Nonso had managed to make Uju lose all her confidence, especially because of her continuous weight gain. Her stepmother Ijoma tried her best to prevent Nonso from hurting Uju, but Nonso refused to be cautioned by her mother. Uju would hide in her room, eating or sewing her dresses, just to avoid Nonso's numerous insults. But despite everything she had gone through, she would think of Olisa, hoping that one day he would come back and ask her to be his bride. One morning, Uju heard her father shouting at the top of his voice. She did not want to come out of her room, but she was also curious to see what the problem was. "It is obvious you cannot pay me my money," Madu shouted. Uju stood at a corner and saw her father in a meeting with an elderly couple, and a young man who seemed quite familiar stood beside them. She could not help but notice how attractive he was, but the next words her father spoke brought her back to reality. "It's either I lock your parents up in the king's dungeon or you marry my daughter Uju," Madu said angrily. Uju was shocked. She tried to run back to her room, but she mistakenly hit a pot of water, which got the attention of everyone. "Thank God you are here. I was going to send somebody to call you," Madu said to Uju. She slowly walked towards them, embarrassed. What was her father thinking? He wanted to exchange her for an unpaid debt. Her eyes caught the young man's eyes, and she quickly looked away. There was a brief silence, and finally, the young man spoke. "Sir, as you may already know, I only returned yesterday. Please, give me 6 months to pay my father's debt, and if I fail to do so, I will marry your daughter as you have requested." Uju was embarrassed. She blamed her weight for the man's rejection. She did not know how much his parents owed, but who would give up an easy way out just to avoid being with her? When the young man and his family left, Madu said to his daughter, "Get ready to be married in 6 months. There's no way he can repay me in a short period of time." Ojo looked at her father and asked, "Papa, why would you make such a deal without informing me? Do I not deserve a say?" But Madu believed he was doing his daughter a favor. "Nobody has come for your hand in marriage, but your sister Nonso has had countless suitors. Or is there someone courting you secretly?" he asked. Uju did not know how to tell him she was waiting for Olisa, so she said, "Please, give me 2 years, and if I do not get married, I will go ahead with whatever you have planned for me," she answered. But immediately, Madu knew the reason for her condition. "My daughter, this is about Olisa, right? What if he does not choose you? Or did he ask you to wait for him? If he did, his father would have mentioned it to me. Enough of this conversation. My decision is final. Get ready to be married in 6 months." Uju cried herself to sleep. She made up her mind to visit the young man the next day so they could find a way out of their problem, even if she had to borrow him some money. She inquired from the maids about the family that came the previous day and where they lived. Then she set out to find him. But on her way out of the compound, she saw him walking towards her house. They exchanged pleasantries, and Uju asked what he was doing at her house. "I love the dress you wore yesterday. It looked perfect on you. I came to ask you where you got it so I can get something similar for my mother. I am sure it will put a smile on her face," he said to her. After hearing his compliments, Uju felt the anger she had for him disappear. "You came to ask about my dress?" she asked shyly. "Well, if you must know, I made it myself," she said to him. The young man looked at her, very impressed, and introduced himself as Ebuka. Then he asked her what her name was, even though he already knew. Uju introduced herself, but she could not shake the feeling that she had met him before. Afterwards, Ebuka asked her if she would like to take a walk with him, and she agreed because it was the perfect opportunity to talk about the dilemma they both faced. They walked for a long time, and Uju learned about Ebuka and how he was sent off to war 6 years ago, where he got injured in battle. Ebuka was captured and sold to a man whom he began to work for. When news about Ebuka got to his parents, they thought he was dead. So his father became very ill, and in a bid to treat his illness, his wife borrowed a huge amount of money from Madu, which they had not been able to pay off for years. How did you escape your master? Uju asked curiously. Escape? My master let me go. I did not have to escape, he said. Ebuka told her that his master was someone they called a negotiator in their village. Whenever there were important decisions to be made in the village, his master had to be present. And even when people wanted to make business deals, they would pay his master to ensure they got the best out of the deal. Ebuka looked at Uju and said, You know what they say about the student and the master. I soon learned my master's trade, and when I was confident, I asked him how many deals I would have to close for me to regain my freedom. Let's just say I made a lot of money for my master before I left. And because he's a kind man, he let me go when I fulfilled my end of the bargain. Uju was fascinated by Ebuka's stories, but she was also tired of pretending like she was not out of breath from the amount of walking they had done. So she slowed down and leaned on a tree to catch her breath. I'm sorry, but I'm tired, she said to him. But he assured her there was nothing to be sorry about. Then he ran to fetch some water for her to drink. Uju was pleased by how nice he was to her. Whenever she panted at home out of tiredness, Nonso made sure to insult her. Uju finally asked him about what had been disturbing her all night. Please, I need you to assure me that you would pay off the debt in 6 months as promised, she said to Ebuka. Don't worry about it. I will pay it off, he responded, nodding his head. And although she had not known him for a long time, she felt she could believe him, especially because of his story. They both began to make their way back home, and just as they were reaching Uju's house, she knew she wanted to see Ebuka again because their conversation was the best she had had in years. I'll make your mother's dress, but you don't have to pay me. It's a gift, Uju said to him. But Ebuka refused. He insisted he was going to pay her for her services, but before he left, he promised he was going to update her regularly of his progress to put her heart at ease. Time passed, and Uju and Ebuka found every opportunity to spend their free time together. Even when they had no reason to meet up, they would find a way to meet each other. Uju shared stories with him about her one true love, Olissa, and how she was eagerly waiting for his return. On the other hand, Ebuka fought hard to pay off his father's debts. He approached landowners who were ready to sell and negotiated a deal with them. Afterwards, he found them a worthy buyer, and at the end of the deal, he would be rewarded with a certain percentage. He also worked for small businesses, negotiating contracts, and soon news about how good he was spread amongst traders and landowners. Uju cheered him whenever he closed a deal, and often they would celebrate with a meal by the riverside where they would have long conversations, forgetting about life's problems. Ebuka also taught Uju his negotiation tricks. Every time he would say to her, It's not enough to make these fantastic dresses and keep them to yourself. You should sell them, and in no time, you would make a fortune. They would both go to neighboring villages and sell off Uju's dresses to interested buyers. Their friendship was wonderful. If you had seen them from afar, you would think they were lovers. One day, Uju said to Ebuka, Olisa, we'll be back in less than 2 years. I wish to lose weight, but I do not think I can do it. Ebuka looked at her and responded, Well, I believe you can if your mind is made up. but I really think you should lose weight for yourself and not for anybody's sake. He told her that he was willing to support her in any way possible, and she gladly accepted his help. Uju and Ebuka began to take long walks to exercise her body, and as for her diet, whenever he could, he helped her cook fresh, highly nutritious meals which they would eat together for dinner by the riverside as usual. Sometimes she would overeat and begin to cry, but Ebuka would comfort her. He never judged her. Rather, he assured her that there would be better days. It was the 6 months, the time for Ebuka to pay his family's debt. He took his parents to Madu's house and made the payment. Madu was very disappointed. He took his anger out on his daughter, and her stepsister Nonso mocked her, saying, I'm sure you were hoping he would fail to pay his parents' debt and marry you. Why would such a handsome man want you? Uju began to feel that Ebuka really had no reason to talk to her anymore. So, though it hurt her, she decided to keep away from him. Several times, Ebuka waited for her at their usual spot, but she never came. But one day, he found an opportunity to ask her maid to call her, and out of respect for their friendship in the past, Uju came out to see him, and he asked her why she had not been coming. I did not want to seem like a burden to you anymore. You've paid the debt. Perhaps you'd like to move on to other things, she said to him. Ebuka was very disappointed that she would say that to him. He thought they were friends. Then he revealed something shocking to her. Uju, I had the complete money to pay your father by the third month, but I enjoyed your company, so I held on to it because I was scared you would stop talking to me when the debt was paid. Uju's heart felt so warm, but what she heard him say next warmed her heart more than she expected. I want to marry you, Uju. I know your heart belongs to another, but I'd like to ask that you give me a chance to prove myself. Uju blushed. She never thought Ebuka saw her that way. You had a chance to marry me, but you chose to pay off the debt, she said shyly to him. What kind of man would I be if I married you in that manner? I had to prove to myself that I am capable of taking care of you, he responded. Ebuka paused for a few seconds, then asked, Do you not remember me? Uju was puzzled by his question. When I was younger, my mother would send me to your house to deliver firewood. One day, I was very hungry and you were eating just outside your house. I guess you were tired of me yawning, but you asked me to eat with you that day, Ebuka said to her. Uju thought for a while. She always thought he looked familiar the first day she saw him. They had met each other over 15 years ago, and Ebuka carried her act of kindness in his heart all those years. Although he never saw her again after their encounter, he thought about her once in a while, and when his parents led him to Madu's house again, he had no doubt he would pay the debt. He just wanted to see Uju again. Uju stood there confused, not knowing what to say, but Ebuka soon broke the silence. I will give you time to think about it, but for now, let's take a walk. I promise to help you out and I plan on keeping to my word. Uju objected. She did not know how to feel. She kind of felt she was cheating on Olissa, but Ebuka assured her that he was not going to speak about his proposal. After the walk, they went their separate ways, but Uju had another surprise waiting for her in her compound. It was Nonso, sitting with her friend Uloma. They were both laughing at the top of their voices, but when they saw her, Uloma began to hail Nonso. Our queen. Nobody else deserves to be queen but you. As she said those words, Nonso stood up and twirled around for her friend to admire her beauty. Uju did not care to understand what they were saying. Her mind was occupied with Ebuka's proposal. Uju, are you not going to greet your queen? Or are you jealous that I will be marrying Olisa next month? Nonso asked Uju. At the mention of Olisa's name, Uju stopped to understand what Nonso was talking about. Which Olisa are you marrying next month? Uju asked her sister. Nonso laughed and responded, I thought you were his best friend. Anyways, for your information, Olisa came back yesterday. He had to return quickly because the king is very sick and he may need to ascend the throne earlier than expected. Uju was crushed, but Nonso still had a lot to say. Well, he needs to get married before he becomes king, and Papa informed me that he and the king have chosen me to be Olisa's bride. Uju burned with anger. Why did her family always find ways to hurt her? But most of all, why had Olisa not come to look for her? She stormed into her room, refusing to cry. She was no longer going to cry for people who did not care about her. But later that evening, the maid told her that Olisa was outside waiting to see her. All the anger she felt for him immediately disappeared. She paced around her room in panic. What if he is disappointed with the way I look? She asked herself. Yes, Uju had lost a bit of weight, but she was still very big. Suddenly, she heard another knock. Uju, the prince is outside. He is still waiting. The maid called again. Uju made up her mind to go and see him. What did it matter? He had already chosen Nonso to be his bride. As she walked down the passage leading to the front door, her heart beat in anticipation. Finally, she would see Olisa again, and when she finally set her eyes on him, his warm smile melted her heart. Uju! He screamed at the top of his voice as he went to hug her. She broke down in tears. That moment felt unreal. It was everything she had imagined it to be. They looked at each other in happiness, and Olisa cleaned her tears. Uju could not help but admire him. He had always been handsome, but seeing him now, he was more handsome than she remembered. Hmm, warrior camp looks good on you, Uju said, teasing him, and he laughed, exposing his perfect dentition. They both sat for a conversation, and Olisa began to apologize for leaving the way he did. I thought I would have a chance to tell you before I left, but my father sent me away in the middle of the night. He said he did not want anyone to know the exact day I was leaving to avoid attacks from his enemies, Olisa said. And Uju forgave him. They chatted for a long time, and to Uju's amazement, he never mentioned her weight gain. Rather, he complimented her on how beautiful and grown she looked. But then he said to her, Uju, I came to discuss something with you. As you may have already heard, my father is gravely ill and I may have to become king soon. Uju's sadness returned because she knew he wanted to talk about Nonso, but she was wrong. Uju, I have to get married, and I know that we have not seen each other for a long time, but I want to marry you, Olisa said, looking hopelessly into Uju's eyes. Uju was surprised. This was different from what Nonso told her. Me? She asked Olisa. You want to marry me? She asked again. But Olisa looked at her with a smile and said, Who else would it be, Uju? Our hearts belong together. Uju was confused. In less than 24 hours, she had gotten proposals from two men who meant a lot to her. Olisa could see she struggled to answer. He was disappointed because he did not expect such a reaction from her. Is there somebody else? He asked politely, but Uju shook her head. She told herself she did not need time to think about it. This was the same Olisa. that she had kept in her heart for years, hoping for the day she would reunite with him. No, there isn't anyone else. I'm just surprised, that's all. I will marry you, Olisa. Of course I will, Uju said to him. Olisa rejoiced loudly. He told her how he hoped and prayed she would remain single all the time he was in camp. His celebration got the attention of Madu and the entire family, and they all came out to see what the noise was about, and Olisa gladly told them. No adjective could be used to describe the look on Nonso's face. Uju looked at her, hoping to feel satisfaction, but she felt empty. This moment was not what she hoped it would be. All she wanted to do was see Ebuka and go on a long walk with him. Nothing beat the moment they both shared together. Preparations for the wedding began as Olisa had to be prepared to be crowned king if necessary. Oftentimes, he walked around the village square with his soon to be bride, and everyone envied them. The girls who had initially mocked Uju wanted to be friends with their future queen. Now, it was Nonso's turn to hide in her room. She had told everyone that she was going to be Olisa's bride. Ebuka, on the other hand, heard about the wedding. He tried to meet with Uju several times, but she refused to meet with him. But he did not fail to send her his usual highly nutritious delicacies through her maid, which Uju ate. But deep down her heart, she wanted to eat with him by the riverside. Uju spent her days with Olisa to take her mind off Ebuka. Just like before, she spent her time sewing her dresses, while Olisa watched with keen eyes as they chatted away. It was a week to the royal wedding, and Uju was feeling suffocated. She could not help but feel she was making the wrong decision. One day, she sat down deep in thoughts when her father interrupted her. Are you okay, my child? He asked her, and Uju nodded. They both sat in silence for a while, and Madu spoke up again. You are not happy, Uju. You have always wanted this, but your mood has been sad since Olisa proposed to you. Uju looked at her father, and tears rolled down her cheeks. Papa, I do not want to marry him, she said. She did not even know where she found the courage to say that to her father, but she just had to speak to somebody. My daughter, I have not been the best of fathers to you, but I know you to a large extent. Olisa is your friend and not your husband. Uju's eyes widened at her father's revelation. Those words gave her the confidence to do what she knew she had to do. So that evening, Uju set out to the palace to end her engagement with Olisa. As she stood in front of his chambers, she wanted to go back home in fear of breaking her friend's heart, but she had to do the right thing. Surprisingly, the guards were not in front of his chambers, so she assumed they escorted him somewhere. Uju decided to sit inside and wait. She sat there silently, waiting for Olisa to come back. But soon, she heard something fall on the floor. She also heard Olisa shout slightly in annoyance. Uju did not realize Olisa was at the other end of his chambers. She slowly began making her way to him, but when she saw Olisa, her mouth dropped in shock. The prince was wearing one of the dresses she sewed with a full face of makeup, striking poses at the mirror. Olisa, what are you doing? Uju asked in shock. Olisa was afraid, so he quickly ran into a room to hide himself. Uju, please leave. I do not want to see anybody now, he said in fear. But Uju refused. She wanted to know what her friend was doing. After several pleas, he came out, very embarrassed. Olisa, what's happening? Uju asked, concerned. Uju, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I have tried my best to change. I have really tried, he said in tears. Olisa began to tell her how his father caught him many years ago wearing Uju's dresses and sent him to the warriors' camp because he thought it would make him more masculine. Uju, I like men. My father knows this. My mother knows this. And I have known it for a very long time. Uju cried with her friend. She couldn't watch him sad. They spoke about how he had struggled for a long time and he apologized to her for trying to trick her into marrying him. And Uju told him the marriage was off because her heart belonged to somebody else. Olisa, do not worry. Your secret is safe with me. She left Olisa's chambers that evening. As she walked home, her mind was filled with so many thoughts. Everything made sense to her now. She remembered how Olisa was quick to ask her to sew her dresses at his place when Madu banned her from sewing. Then he would force her to make certain styles. It was obvious it was his choice of clothing. It was what he wanted to wear. She thought he just wanted to spend more time with her, but she was clearly wrong. She was so deep in her thoughts that she did not notice Ebuka standing close to the road that led to her house. Uju, Ebuka called out. As soon as Uju set her eyes on him, she ran and hugged him, and Ebuka reciprocated. She told him that she had called off the engagement with Olisa, and if his offer was still on the table, she would marry him. Ebuka was over the moon with excitement. He showed her the delicacy he planned to deliver to her that day. My wife, I brought you chicken and some fresh vegetables, he said, laughing. Uju held his hand and they both walked to the riverside where they enjoyed their meal together. Ebuka and Uju eventually got married. They were the perfect pair. It took 4 years, but Uju finally got to a healthy body size with the help of her husband, who supported her at her down and happy times, and of course, with his nutritious, healthy delicacies. He became very rich due to his negotiation skills, and Uju finally had the freedom to focus on her dressmaking business, which she grew to be very successful with Ebuka's negotiation skills and her exceptional talent. Uju's dresses were worn by women of different sizes in her village and in villages afar. And as for Olisa's secrets, Uju never shared it with anyone, including her husband. Like she promised Olisa, his secret was indeed safe with her. Thank you for watching this story today. I hope you enjoyed it. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce you to another channel, African Tales by Uzo. Her work is fantastic. I will leave a link in the description so you can check out her stories. And also, if you want to learn to generate the type of images I use on my channel, there will also be a link in the description box to reach out to someone that can help you. Even if you do not want to learn, he has a team that can help you generate these images for your stories or whatever project you are working on. Thanks again for watching this story today. Please leave a comment telling me what you learned, and if you enjoyed it, please like and share it with your loved ones. Till next time. Bye.